We actually have a lot of great questions that's already queued up really nicely by Scuzoid. On your website, the fourth image in the slideshow shows Sholei selecting a mastery and has a bar for skills he gets as he increases in level. Is that menu available in the current arena demo, or is that something that needs the army tab to make it viewable?
This is actually just a shortcoming of the controls for the unit info menu. It's just something I forgot to add to the demo. If you press W or S while in that menu, you can switch between the unit info menus. There are four of them. There's one that shows the stats and their inventory, which is the most important. There's the second one which shows masteries and abilities. There's the third which shows skills and companion bonds. Then there's the last one which is their astrality. So I did not include a little guide that shows that you can move between those, and I need to add a little button that you can click that can let you switch between them. I'm thinking of just adding like a cool little paper tab that kind of sticks out of the book that you can just click on and it'll switch to those menus. Those are definitely accessible, and those are what Scuzoid has mentioned for the mastery. You do increase your mastery slowly as you use those items and equipment and spells, and it shows there how much you have filled up of that mastery. So yes, that is available. It's just not immediately obvious that you can see them because there's no button or indication on how to switch the menu.
And is that going to be something that's part of the tutorial?
So the easiest way I have found for menus is to make things really obvious that you can click on them, right? That's something I just need to fix with the unit info menu because I've made it easy to use in a development standpoint, but not from a user standpoint just yet. It's very easy for me to switch to them. I just need to make it obvious. But one thing that will probably be easy to do is just when you open up that menu for the first time, a little tutorial pops up that does a little gold blinking thing like press this button to view the unit's information. Or I could just have that little tutorial slider pop up as soon as you've opened the unit info, and it just tells you press these buttons to change info. So that's just something I need to improve. It'll only take a little bit to do that. It's just one of those little oversights from having worked on the game for so long.
Amazing, amazing. And then on to the second question. When you middle click a unit in battle, you can see their unit stats. There's a bunch of gray numbers in multiples of 5 to the right of each stat. What are they?
Yeah, so those are the unit stat growth. So that's actually kind of a little development option I've put in there. If people really want to know the growths of each of those units, they may look at them. But I also do it for my own self in case for whatever reason saving is not going correctly. So all those values for each unit need to be saved, right, from chapter to chapter. And I had an instance where, for whatever reason, a few units were getting extra stat boosts. So every time it loaded them, it would add like 20 or 30 to a bunch of their stats. So suddenly I had Sholei getting like plus 5, 15, 20 to strength and speed from a single level up. That was why I had that little thing there, so I could ensure that every time I saved and loaded that those values stayed there. But then I thought that maybe I should just keep them there anyways because it might be useful for players who want to check what those values are. I just need to add a little tooltip as well if they're available that says like these are the growths of the unit.
And I think that's why having that demo to try these items out is so helpful. You've got this perspective from developing the game and you know all the intricate details and such. Having that perspective of people trying it out, seeing what they actually click on and what's intuitive to them is going to be super duper helpful feedback for the game.
Sorry, I had to sneeze really quick and I turned off my mic.
Gesundheit.
Yes, so these things are definitely little things I don't notice because I'm just working on it. People pointing them out is very nice because otherwise there'll just be stuff in the game and it's not explained right. Did I answer that?
Okay.
Okay. I think I
Yep.
did.
Yeah, you're good.
On the topic of growths too, so this is something I just talk about because I played the Fire Emblem games a lot. Just to explain the growths themselves, so every time a unit levels up in most Fire Emblem games, there's a chance that every stat will get an increase to it. It's randomized usually. If you have a 50% growth rate in that stat, there's a 50% chance it will increase. So I started out with that actually in the game, but I decided to make a set mode. You get the same growths no matter what, so once they reach certain levels, they always get a specific stat increase. That was really useful for me to test out characters to see if they were even good at certain things. And it's very helpful because I can just pretty much throw them into the game at any time, just set their level, and then they will have the correct stats for that level. But that's an option you can play as if you want to, try out randomized runs, is you can do, okay, this time I want a randomized stat mode. So it will actually just run through those random chances, and sometimes you'll get great stats, sometimes you will get really bad stats. As a baseline for people, I suggest just playing it with the base stat growth system because it better captures those units as they're meant to be in the game.
That's actually a question of mine. Is there anything in the Fire Emblem games that you didn't like that you feel you're improving upon?
Yeah, so a lot of what the Fire Emblem games do, especially with the stat growth, is a lot of things are kind of out of your hands. You just sort of hope that RNGesus blesses you with good stats. And I kind of like the approach that Dungeons and Dragons has, where you are building a character. So I kind of did a halvesies of that, where the game guides the character in a way that is best suited for their class and who they are as an individual. But then there's also that player aspect in that they want to make sure certain stats get better. And so I have that in the game where after a few, there's different levels where when you reach it, you get to pick a stat to increase. You only get maybe 6 or 7 of these stat choices throughout the game, maybe for each individual unit, but it gives you a little more control. So if you're finding that, say, a character is lacking a little bit in defense, or they just need like barely a little bit more speed and they can start doubling people, then you can give them that one little stat boost as kind of a bonus. The same goes for masteries. So there's a lot of masteries, and so I felt that people, if they want to experiment with those masteries, that they need a little more agency. So rather than having class locked masteries, I made it so that any class can use and any unit can use any item or spell. They just might suck at it because they might have really low mastery in it. But because people might want to experiment with, well, what if I add wind magic to my flyer? What kind of build can I do with that? I wanted to make sure they could at least jumpstart that, right, rather than having to start from like 0 with everything and have to grind through specific training. So at certain levels to kind of represent player agency once again, I give them the options that every now and then you can choose a mastery and improve that so you can just start building a really cool character if you want to. Different classes have different numbers of both masteries and stat boosts they get. So there are some classes, they're called specialists. They specialize ideally on only 1 or 2 types of weapons, and so they get more stat boosts. Whereas there's kind of hybrid characters that get lots of mastery options but fewer stat boosts. These are the kind of characters that they're going to be using all sorts of different magic types, so they should be getting more options for mastery increases.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bowie has a neat quote from someone who isn't an artist listening to an artist. I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. What do you think about that, Lazy?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an artist for a long time, right? And I think art comes from self-expression, right? But then we also give our art out to the world, and we have to deal with people looking at it and criticizing it and saying, whether they like it or love it. And in doing so, we engage in this conversation and we change our artwork inevitably, right? Because it's a sharing experience. But I think there is this risk of trying to suit what people want from you in your artwork. And if you go too far with it, then you lose part of why you do art in the first place, right? You lose that self-expression. And so I think there's this Goldilocks zone of doing that, right? You have to make art. You have to be able to be okay with people criticizing your art and liking certain things, but you also have to try and make sure that you express what you want in the end. And that's hard, as I'm finding recently, but I think it is the best way to be happy with your artwork.
There's definitely a really unique balance between having something that's really dear to you and this world that you have a vision for. And then when you show it to the world and the world answers back, it can be quite a bit different from your expectations.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Squeezewood's third question.
Yeah.
Last week, Lilette mentioned the parent of the protagonist for the third game. And then this past Feature Friday, Warlock mentioned the parent of Sholay. This got me thinking about the main thing I enjoy about God of War and Children of Morta is that you're not fighting gods and monsters to be the hero. You're doing it for your family. So, is family an important aspect to the story of Lords of Nysera? Will family members interact throughout the game? Will multiple family members join the army?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring this up because family is, we joke between Lilette and I about family and how it's kind of a trope nowadays. But genuinely, in my game, almost everything is related to some kind of family ordeal. There are families that run entire market enterprises. There are families that have inherited these bloodlines, right? The very idea of a bloodline in a game, be it magical or just like made up, right, involves family conflict. And the family struggles and like interpersonal relationships are very, very important to my game, and there absolutely is many family interactions. So almost every character in the game has a family member that you will meet, be they a father, mother, brother, sister, or even their children. They will have some play in the storyline, or at least their own personal storyline, because I feel like that's where lots of conflict comes from, especially when you have inheritance and whatnot involved in a world. Definitely expect lots of family situations going on. The first example is obviously, as we've discovered, Shole and Ania. They are both siblings. They have this magical bloodline of fire, and their whole family has this storied history, and they carry it with them wherever they go. People know that, oh, you're the kids of Hara. And they're like, yeah, we're the kids of Hara. We know that. And they're judged based off of what she did already in Evelyn, for example, because she was also a keeper just like Shole is. He has this reputation even before he gets there. That's something he struggles with. And then eventually in the games, these characters have their own kids. They have their own problems after that. So this is an ongoing theme, truthfully, in the game. And there may be gods related in it. There may be these huge events going on that shake the world. But in the end, it's about the people that are working together and trying to survive through it all that the story is more about than anything. And that carries true through all of the planned games I have in it. So by the end of the game, you've seen this final like protagonist, this third and fourth member of the family. All of these events, all of these decisions made by their predecessors affect the decisions that they have to make in the end. So, to your answer, Schoolzoid, yes, it is definitely a lot of family interactions. Some of them are good and some of them are very sad. So, expect that as well. Not everything is a good family moment.
And then how about generationally? That's going to be a huge theme, really, throughout all three games.
Yes. I believe in games and worlds, especially having depth to their people. I think very often we focus on just the characters we get to play as and not thinking where do they come from and who comes after them. Sometimes we do time skips in games and people age and they have their different character arcs, but what do they leave behind for their kids? What decisions did they make that either make their kids' lives better or much, much worse? Generationally, this is kind of a goal of the game. This is partly why I was so inspired by Fire Emblem 4, which is one of my favorite games ever, and it has a huge influence on it. Sometimes you have these characters that are trying to do their best to make a better life for their kids, but things just go completely out of control, and their kids inherit those problems. That's why inheritor is a common word you see in lots of like the tiers and whatnot, or just mentionings in my world, because inheritance means more than just the money your family leaves behind. It's the troubles and the bloodshed and the grudges that continue throughout history and that affect all these lives throughout the stories. That's how generations really work. And on a gameplay standpoint, right? That means there's inheritors to your character. People you pair up in the game will inevitably have children, and those children will get they get different stats based off of who their parents were, different skills, and their story will change up as well. Some kids will or will not be born depending on which parents you pick with them. There's lots of replayability in the future sequel stuff that's going on that I have planned. But for now, it's all about the Lords of Nysera, which are these main characters that I have built already, because that's the goal, is to release this part of the game, and then the inheritor part, that's a whole other beast that will be coming on later. But that's all a part of this plan, right? This long-term goal for a game and a story that's not just this singular entity that can be just made and be done with.
So wait, are you saying that players, depending on which characters they pair up, they'll get different kids?
Yeah, so because certain characters are met at different times. There's characters that show up very late to the story. When you pair up one of them with them, there's no time skippy part of it, right? They may fall in love, or they may have been like ex-lovers to begin with. They may have a kid with them, but they have only one kid. Whereas you have relationships that can start early, and they will have multiple kids. And these are like more like the canon ones, like the early ones. They just have a specific number of kids, and they always sort of show up. But there's some where like because of who they meet, their kids will look different. Because if you have someone from, say, Arceus, who they're very dark-skinned, match up with someone who's from Salanthir, very light-skinned, they will have a different looking kid, right? And so I've actually planned for specific kid combination. They might have similar classes just because of like, it's useful to have similar classes when you pair people up in these kinds of scenarios. But yeah, their actual characters will be different. And
Amazing. That's
of
something
course,
I'm actually very excited for. And I think that gives insight into why you say that there's branching storylines.
yeah, we've had to be careful with that term, right? Because when people hear branching storylines, and I kind of got checked on this, right? They think of The Witcher or Chrono Trigger, where you have these vastly different outcomes depending on what you choose, to the point that you may have, or Mass Effect, maybe not like a great example, but that you can vastly change the course of history in a game. And while that's partially true in Lords of Nysera and in these games, in that you have these alternate routes, right? Because the history is muddled, right? It's a story being told to a child for one, and so not all the notes and information is really known about what happened. And so there's embellishments. When did this
Wait,
character?
hold on. I'm going to pause you real
Sure.
quick. This story is being told to a child? What do you mean by that?
So in an older version of the demo, I had the intro sequence, which will be out. I revised it recently, and it's going to be re-released with the arena demo. So you'll be able to pick between doing the prologue or doing the arena, which people are probably more familiar with now. You will quickly realize that this is a story being told to another character, and she is recounting the story that was told to her. So it's kind of how I've been able to make sense of these different storyline possibilities, right? Because if you have a history set in stone, then events have to follow a certain way, right? But if it's a story being told from someone who remembers a story, they don't remember at all, and they might get most of the history right, but things will change. Especially when you think about how lots of history exists already, where it's like so and so died in the battle of so and so. And it's like, well, how did they die? When did they die? Did they die from their wounds? Did they die, years later from, lung problems? We don't always know all the events that happened in history. So this lens of being able to have it told through a story, in the case of this like kid, so she's being told this story that she wants to listen to, and then she is recounting it to another person. So there's this telephone of stories being told, and the core themes of the story persist, but the details get muddled because of how time works.
Very interesting. I like that. There's there's certainly a lot of layers to the game that you've developed.
Yes, probably too many at this point, but it's fun.
I think feedback from the community is definitely going to help just peel that back and help check some things too.
Yes.
It really plays into what it truly means to be a creator. There's artists who will create things but never show. And we probably to this day don't know that they exist. The artists who create and show, their story will change with that meeting of their work in the world, and just that kind of internal struggle that happens with the artist trying to figure out, hey, what's authentic to me? I'm sure that as we hear what the community has to say and giving those different perspectives and insights, it's going to bring a lot of color, that you're going to take into consideration in the game, which I think is going to be quite beautiful.
Thank you.
Moving on to question number 4, though. Given how powerful the legendary from the Feature Fridays made out to be, do you suspect balancing the difficulty of the game will be a struggle to make it entertaining to both casual players who are mostly here for the story and for the elite players who have beaten every Fire Emblem multiple times on maddening mode?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic because when I released a very rough demo a long time ago now, just to kind of some friends and family to bug test. They found it to be very difficult actually, because I had been playing it through the lens of a long-time Fire Emblem player. Like even I was having times where like, oh, I lost the battle just testing out the game. And then when I heard from friends like, yeah, I couldn't beat the demo because it was too hard. I had to kind of rethink my perspective on it, right? And actually endeavor to make a proper, not just like difficulty settings, but thinking like a different player. That was probably my first step to realizing that not everyone plays Fire Emblem like me, or plays games like me for that matter. As far as the arena goes, it was also mostly meant to be something we could play very easily at the convention. So it's kind of intended to be a cakewalk once you realize, like, if you just use your magic users, you can blow away enemies so easily. You get a huge advantage because you go first. But that was kind of the goal, right? Is to make sure that when people play the demo, they're not just absolutely getting wasted. Because I actually let people try out the prologue a little bit, and they struggled a lot more with it because there's reinforcements and there's more enemies, and you don't get to always make the first attack in some cases. So, and it's just more complicated than this very structured arena setting. On the topic of balancing, right? I do worry that there will be balancing issues, but that's going to be the fun part of testing the game, because I think it's important to really capture legendary items. I'm actually making a little short just on this topic that eventually I'm going to release. There is this tendency to try and make sure everything fits really easily and meshes and that everything's balanced. And I don't want that to, water down legendary equipment and truly powerful items. That's going to be my initial focus, is to ensure that the powerful weapons are indeed powerful. At the same time, it needs to not be a cakewalk. So there will be some balancing, and I think most of it is going to be making sure that the AI in the game use the same abilities that you can. That's one thing I have found in my own testing, is that it's very easy to defeat enemies in the game when you're the only one that can cast spells that hit 5 people at once. But as soon as they're lobbing fireballs and shooting lightning bolts at you, then suddenly you're taking huge hits to your army as well. You have to start planning things out differently. There will be balancing issues, but that's what bug testing is for. That's what play testing
Exactly.
is. And there will be probably at least maybe 6 months once the game is out in a playable state of just tinkering, where people will play it and they'll give it a try, and the game may run just fine, but they find, especially with how many options people will have in the game, they might find, oh well, like this spell is just really good at killing enemies and they have no way to counter it, and they don't use it against you, so it's real easy right now. That's a possibility, but that's also, in my opinion, a good indicator that I'm capturing this world properly. Because if anyone's read the Malazan books, which are all about pretty much this really gritty, grimdark, magical world, I think it best captures, in any fantasy book I've read, what magical warfare is like. That when you actually introduce magic to a war system, it gets so insane. And I've never seen a game capture that same feeling of, oh my gosh, there isn't just like people shooting a few magic arrows here and there. We have to actually counteract specific magical abilities to ensure that our army isn't just deleted more or less in a second. So that's another big goal of the game. If you had a world with magic, wouldn't they use it to every possible extent in warfare? That's going to mean there's going to be some insane testing that needs to be done. That's something that we'll just have to work through as like a community of like, okay guys, here's a new build. We made sure that this spell doesn't just win the battle for you, right? So yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit with that question.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely. Magic is going to be a point of scrutiny,
Yes.
and it's something that's going to need special attention
Right.
just because of that. But thankfully, we've got amazing testers out there already. They're going to have a direct influence on how those game mechanics play out.
And I think a really important kind of thing to do in game development is scaling. So you don't want to introduce big, terrible things to your players like in the very beginning, right? You want them to start out with just whacking each other with swords. In the very beginning, you got your sword, they got their axe. You're just duking it out, learning the mechanics of the game. And then eventually you find out, oh, I have this spell that can be used to hit multiple people. And only you get to use that for now. You're the only one, but then eventually you realize, oh, the other team also gets those spells. They can also hit me with those spells. And then you gradually learn, usually through good interactions. I don't like surprising people with bullshit stuff where it's like, oh, your army got onto the field and they were killed by a meteor. I think that's a little unfair. Instead, I like to introduce it through allies. In one chapter I recently finished, you have an ally that shows up and they cast a spell that protects a whole region from ranged attacks so that they don't get hit by ballistas. It's like, oh, that's really neat. What did they do? You look at it, you look at what spell he had in his inventory, and you can find that, oh, this is a spell and it does this for me. So they've got that in their memory just from seeing an ally use it for them. As opposed to, say, an enemy can just drop that on you and be like, haha, I have this ability, you didn't even know it existed in the game. That will eventually happen in some small cases when players are very much used to just this incredible amount of magic in the game. But very early on, it's supposed to be this drip feed of information, right? And that's hopefully how it will play out.
Amazing, amazing. And we've got one more question. It says, finally, last week you mentioned how religion isn't exactly the same in Nysera as it is on Earth. Gods are just the gods. It seems to be a given that everyone understands. Is it possible that aspect changes in the future, beyond Lords of Nysera? Denying reality is a very human condition, and starting a religion worshipping their eternal storm as the one true God is equally funny, dumb, and realistic.
Yeah, so I actually got some great feedback on this very topic through another Reddit post where I was talking about how would this storm change the world. And so you are right in that the people know the gods exist, but you may have heard this term being thrown around called the Severance. The Severance is just what it sounds like. The people of Nysera were suddenly severed from contact to the gods, so they could no longer talk to them. They didn't know what they were thinking, what they wanted, or even where they were going, because these were very common things. If a god visited the world, you knew it, and it was a big deal. They're kind of more like celestial celebrities. You can't really ask for much from them, but when they show up, you might be in their graces for long enough to get a selfie with them. But suddenly they're just not around. Nobody knows what they're saying. Nobody knows what they're hearing. There's this calamity that happens, and that's where the idea of religion actually becomes a thing in the world. It's very new. So suddenly you have people worshiping the gods and trying to pray to them when this was never a thing. Nobody ever built temples and sacrificed anyone, right? Because they figured out a long time ago, well, that's worthless. They don't want sacrifices. They don't need anything from us, especially the people who were in constant contact with them. But definitely once the Severance happened, boy, it's just nobody knows what's going on anymore, especially the regular people, effectively the humans of the world, because they already didn't have a whole lot of contact with the gods, and now there's even less. And so they definitely start making up stuff and trying to come up with explanations. And the storm wall is an especially interesting one because the world used to be very huge by comparison. The continents you see in the world right now, that's 1/3 of the entire planet. So it used to be a much larger world just landscape wise to be accessed, and now people have been born and died during this time where the storm's already been there for years, even though it didn't used to be. And so you got people saying, well, what's beyond the storm wall? Are we trapped in here? Are we the only thing in here? Or is there a bigger, wider world out there that we don't know about? Some people think that it's heresy to try and go beyond the storm wall. And then there's also the people, the factions, which aren't even mentioned in the game because nobody's been in contact with them. They're trying to get into the eye of the world. So there's a lot going on there, and you will meet some very interesting factions that are effectively flat earthers. They've bought wholesale into this idea that there's nothing beyond the wall. This is all that is. The wall is the only new god now, even though it's actually a bunch of more or less elementals that became a storm. And then of course you have these other people in the world that have lived forever. They've been around since the world's creation, and they're just looking at these people freaking out over this magical storm, and they're like, guys, no, that's not a god. they know what gods are, and that's not one. So there will be lots of little interesting, kind of almost Easter egg conversations. But as far as like what will arise from that afterwards, that's more like future related stuff, right? In the time of like the story being told, actually, I won't go too far into it because it's probably like a little spoilery, so I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, the religion is becoming a newish thing, and it's in its very like baby steps. So lots of these religions don't even know how to form a proper clergy. So some of them have just become militant because they believe that something went wrong and they need to prove everyone right, and so on and so forth. It'll be very interesting to see how that pans out, especially with players who are like, wait, I thought religion isn't a thing here, and then you have even characters in the game not really buying into it because it's like, oh yeah, you suddenly know how what Vime is thinking now, the god of order that used to go talk to people about what his ideas were. Yeah, I don't think you know. So yeah, that would be my answer to that question then.
Nice. And then I want to get Lake's question in real
Yep.
quick before she leaves here. Which immortal character from the game do you admire or is your favorite?
Yeah, so my favorite immortal character is probably Kier. Kier is one of the oldest characters in the world. He's likely considered, he's a kind of the equivalent of an Adam, even though there actually was no like first person made. They were made in a large group. And he's regarded as the first traveler of the worlds. He was the first to kind of step out of this safety zone that the gods made for their people and go exploring and seeing what they had in store for them, right? He got to explore and check things out. He was very powerful too. So he is this immensely powerful magician, and he was very quickly learned that you could jump between spaces. So he was the first to learn how to what's called arc leap. So you can condense space, move, and teleport to somewhere. So he started really getting into just seeing all of the world. And then he quickly found out, well, we're not even restricted to our planet. We can go to these other realms that the gods have made and see what's going on there. So he became this incredibly famous traveler of not just Nysera, but of the entire realm itself and the realms outside of it. He has a huge influence on the story. He's still around, so the player will meet him at some point and get to talk to him. He's kind of this he's become enigmatic, right? Because he's this mysterious character who everyone knows about, but not everyone meets. And when you do meet him, he may be around for only a couple seconds, and so most people have like 50 questions they want to ask him, and then he like just says something kind of funny and then moves on and goes exploring wherever he's going to go. So I have lots of sketches of him. We might even do a feature Friday on that guy at some point because he's such a like central character to not only the story but the kind of eventual progression of how things went down from the initial people, the Anvala as they are known, who were made. He's definitely my favorite immortal. I have other ones that are like I identify with more. He was really the first immortal person I thought of in the game, and he's just become so intrinsic to the world and lore that he's kind of just my favorite. He's like the storyteller type, right? He's always going around telling people what he's encountered. He's written so many different accounts of stuff, and people have written just books about things that he has said to people. So there's people that just go around trying to find individuals who have spoken with him so they can glean information and quotes to compile into these books.
Amazing. And we have another question too that actually comes from outside of this stream
Okay.
and was, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, was from the Kickstarter page itself. Question on future plans, like Wargroove. Might it be possible to make a custom battle map? Something that even could be shared via Steam Workshop to add more playability to the game?
Yeah, so I think I answered this on the Kickstarter, but I'll try and remember exactly what I said here. I do love the idea of map editors. I think they're very cool, but I think there is this risk of making your maps very simple with them, right? Because you have to think of when you're making a map editor, right? How can I make this easy to use in the game? And some solutions for that are, well, a mountain is just one tile, and that represents a mountain wherever you go. And you can have little variations, but you end up sort of simplifying how a map looks to make it accessible for people. And that was not my focus on making maps in the game, because I want maps to represent the actual geography of the place you're in. Every map that you go to on the overworld is a section of the world map that I've zoomed in really, really far, right? And then I recreate that in some way that is suitable for a battle. It's not always perfect because I'm tiling on these little squares, but I'm trying to recreate the actual geography itself and how it either inhibits the world. So like some people cannot pass beyond certain mountains. So I put those types of mountains there, or rivers and whatnot. All those show up very specifically on maps. And to allow people to do the same thing and make their own maps is cool, and I love that. But the problem is I've made these really detailed tiles. So some of them are literally meant to recreate a specific mountainside to make it look like as it appears from the map. And that's really tedious to do already, to be able to like pick those tiles, put them into the maps myself. And that's with like a very streamlined map editor that has tools and all these different things. So I'm very tempted to do that, and I probably will at some point. But the first iteration of that will actually just be castle building. There will be all these cool large maps that are just kind of blank, but they allow you to build your own castle on, and you can make a little defensive location to more or less to do battles with against invaders, as sort of a mini game in it that's not really essential to the story, but the goal will be that you can share your maps. So you'll be able to share your challenge maps with other people and see what they conquer it or not. That's one idea I've come up with. The other would be just making a simplified map version, kind of like how Wargroove has. There's only a few different tiles, and it's very easy to just pick and put down whichever ones you want, and you can share those battles with other people. You can drop in. I already have a little like spawn egg system, so you can just drop in units that other people will have to just fight in the game. It's definitely doable, and it's something I would like to have in the game. But for now, the goal is 100% finishing up the chapters, making sure that people have a great storyline to play, and then everything else will be icing.
Amazing. So we've got space to ask any questions under the sun.
What you got for us? Yes, so there's only a few of them.
Make sure you read the question too.
Oh yeah, so the question is, will there be any canon spouses in Lords of Nysera? The answer is there's only 2 of them. So there's only 2 that are pretty much set in stone. And they're more or less among the main lords. Sholei and Isidar, that's one canon spouse. They have kids that continue on throughout the entire storyline. So that's one thing that doesn't change. Same thing, and there's one couple that they come married. They have not gotten as much of a spotlight yet because they're later on in the game, but Oshev and Elthrid, so one, she's the smaller Asian looking lady, and the armored black guy, they are a couple. They come as a couple, kind of like Pern, I think it's Pern and Luis in Fire Emblem 7. So they come as a couple, they're already a thing. They still have supports though, or companion threads, and so they get to have their companion threads with each other, and you get to expand on their relationship. So there is plenty to do with them still, but they have their own set in stone things. But Perrine, on the other hand, Perrine does not. So she is the only lord of the 5 that you have choices on who she matches up with.
That's really interesting because Perrine, from what I can tell, is a very stoic personality.
Yeah, so she actually has, because she's the main lord, right? She has the most romantic options in the game, kind of like how Ella would, or any of the lords in like lots of the Fire Emblem games. They can marry 4 different people because they're a mainline character. So she's the only one that has the most options, just because that's kind of how I built it. So she's also kind of a wild card. Lots of different things can happen with her storyline and her kids. So lots going on there. But yeah, so to answer the question, only 2 relationships are canon. There's probably like, I think lots of games they sort of canonize some relationships as like kind of to explain how the story goes, but the truly only like set in stone ones are those 2.
Amazing.
So Scuza also says, awesome, matchmaking in video games is fun, but established love interests that have history before you even arrive is also fun when you're engaged in those characters. So I I agree with this 100%. I do like matchmaking in games, but I don't also believe that everyone should be able to be with anyone. I do think that compatibility exists as like a human thing. There are some relationships between people that, of opposite genders that otherwise could be a couple, but they just don't have that relationship. I think that's a very realistic thing. And so you have people that are just friends and that they have these awesome relationships to build between them. You have people that hate each other too. Like that's, I think, something that doesn't get focused on very often, and especially these types of games, is that you have some characters that there may be supports, right? Quote unquote supports or conversations they have, but they're never friends. They never actually like each other, and they have struggles between each other, right? They may even hate being around each other, but they're forced to because of this conflict they're a part of. So I want to explore all those different types of things that I think people go through in just in life. So yeah.
Agreed. Honestly, I can think of those kinds of relationships where, you do want to be friends with them, but for some reason you're always stepping on each other's toes.
Right.
And then excuse what I said, work spouses and work enemies.
Yep.
Exactly. Well, that tidies up the rest of our stream today. We
Perfect
are
timing.
at 3 o'clock, and we'll see you guys next week.
This was fun, guys. Thanks for all your questions.